Before we jump in, a quick note of who's behind this podcast. Imagine this. You're about to close this massive deal. You've been grinding for it. You're pumped. And then your customer's legal team decides to make things interesting. What happens if you get hacked? How do you protect your data? And then your brain just goes blink. That's the nightmare founders deal with all the time. That's actually what YSecurity solves, the sponsor of today's show. There are 40 plus security engineers who've actually done security at Apple, Uber, Microsoft, Robinhood, Brex, and so many more. And get this, you don't hire them, you rent them by the hour. No massive salaries, no expensive consultants, just real experts embedded in your company helping you get SOC 2, ISO, HIPAA, whatever it is that you need to close that big deal. Set a monthly cap, know exactly what you're spending, and close the deal. Head to ysecurity.io/startups and book your free strategy call. Your first 8 hours are free. 40 engineers, 1 full working day, totally free. Go take it. ysecurity.io/startups.
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the security podcast of Silicon Valley. Today's honorable guest is Jasson Casey. Jasson, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Where are you calling in from, Jasson?
I am in the beautiful place of upstate New York.
Awesome. Have you always been on the East Coast? Have you started your career on the East Coast?
No, I started my career in Texas, believe it or not. And I'd say I worked the first half of my career in Texas, and then I migrated east. Growing up, I always thought I'd end up in California. And I remember when I was dating my wife at the time, it's like, you got to be able to work in California. And I guess I'm the one eating crow because A, we moved east, and B, we actually moved for her job. I was largely flying to California on a plane anyway. But yeah, moved to DC, lived there for a while, then moved to New York, and left the city to experience the countryside during the pandemic and kind of fell in love.
Awesome. I know you started your career in the telecom space, and it's very interesting because telecommunications are very important for any business to be successful or for anyone to be successful in today's world. You have to be able to connect with people, to have to be able to connect with organizations. Now we are in this ever-evolving space of the importance of secure communications. Where do you see the secure communications today, and what's the biggest pain point in secure communications, making sure that you speak with a trusted party?
It's honestly like a line from Star Wars, right? It surrounds us, it binds us, it touches everything. There's nothing that you do that shouldn't involve secure communications in some way, shape, or form. And the reality is you're not actually getting it. For instance, most websites, when you log in, still use a username and password. And the developers, whether they rolled something themselves or even use some common open source tooling, are largely passing your password as clear text over what they believe is giving them privacy, integrity, and authenticity, i.e. TLS or HTTPS. And the reality is we've kind of forgotten that the modern development practice is to use a third-party load balancer, is to use a third-party content distribution network, that most enterprises run local proxies to actually open and re-terminate TLS connections. Maybe we have a Kubernetes cluster, right? We're the service mesh. So there are all of these scenarios where TLS, certainly not end-to-end, and generally being opened and re-terminated by third parties. So your surface area, knowing where confidential information exists, whether it was securely deleted, how is it tracked, is kind of exponential, combined with the fact that it's not really trackable. You can't really defend it. There was a famous paper maybe 10 or 15 years ago in the academic community where they were testing the security of various online providers by creating an account, never logging in again. And their premise was, could they judge who had decent back-end security services by seeing that password get reused on third-party services? I forget the exact numbers, but anything larger than 0 or 1% would be surprising. And it was definitely double digits. The way you can explain that is twofold. Number one, these sites are constantly getting rolled. But number two, the way we communicate with each other isn't actually as secure as we think. There's a lot of examples of that have come about because of mistakes, right? So if you remember Cloudbleed from 5 or 6 years ago, without getting into all the details because it's old news, but if you sent the right kind of crafted packet to Cloudflare, you got a 4096 byte dump of somebody else's TLS connection. And that was a mistake, but clearly the most sophisticated, Cloudflare, can make these sorts of mistakes. So certainly the others can. And then right now, can't remember if it was Unit 42 or I forget what researcher was reporting on this, but you've got a threat actor, Secret Blizzard. So it's Russian, likely SVR, targeting diplomatic core operating within Russia or Russian-influenced partners, basically capturing and man-in-the-middling TLS connections. And the way they do it is their malware is dropping kind of a CA that they control into the target device, but then it deletes itself, just leaves the CA or a browser plugin in some other versions and kind of opens the connection and copies everything out. So a bit of a long response, but the secure communications is kind of important in almost everything we do because of how much information and data we share, and we're almost never getting it.
It's almost like an iceberg. When you communicate with a platform or with a system, it may seem that on surface things are peachy, but you don't really know what happens under the hood, and you touched on this a little bit. You have the entire attack vector of the supply chain. You don't really know what packages are being used under the hood, and you don't actually get to control it being the end user of that system. Passwords are still around. I recently spoke with Taher, the father of the SSL, and his goal was to eliminate the passwords in general because we have secure browser experience because of the TLS that exists today, but the passwords are still around. What are some of the solutions that you see for that pain point?
So it's funny you called out Taher. I was talking to him just 2 hours ago. You probably know this. He's on our board and he was an early advisor in the company. So it goes deeper than passwords would be my first point. Access tokens, API keys, session cookies. The idea that you're going to device bind something based on an IP address is kind of a very brittle and silly concept and certainly a security heuristic. When you look at classes of attacks that ultimately result in session hijacking, what are they doing but copy and pasting some sort of symmetric secret, right? Or shared secret from one location into another.
Static, it's long-lived, you don't rotate it.
Well, I would argue it's even more fundamental than that. Imagine it wasn't long-lived. Imagine it was short-term use. The fact that it moves is where the original surface area comes from. Let's make a terrible analogy. The opening for like Tron Legacy, I imagined I was a series of bits traveling through the microprocessor. But if we were to think like that, imagine I'm a piece of data traveling from the browser that you're typing something in on, or the browser that's storing a session cookie or an access token, all the way back to the database on the back end. You're getting written and read from memory on the local system. If you're in an enterprise, probably in a Palo Alto or a Zscaler reverse proxy or forward proxy, and a content distribution network, right? So probably in Cloudflare or CloudFront or one of the other CDNs. Probably in the ALB if you're in Amazon, right? Whatever the regional ALB is for your architecture. Maybe in another load balancer in your zone. Probably in a Kubernetes service mesh. So like you've now traveled through all of these things. Think back to fundamentals, right? Load, store architecture. When I store and then load a piece of memory, the data's still in the memory, unless I go back and write over that memory. And so our kind of take on all of this when we first got started was it's not necessarily that long-lived and rotation is the problem. Like that's also a heuristic to the problem. The problem is that it moves in the first place. And so we asked ourselves, is there a world in where it didn't have to move? And of course, the answer is trivial, right? Yeah, you could adopt some sort of asymmetric cryptography, use a private key for signing, and then the only thing that has to move is the public key, which gives away nothing. But then one of our guys came up with this stronger idea, which is what if we could guarantee it didn't move? And the observation he made was, look, HSMs give you a way to attest to create key pairs in servers to where you know the signing key can't move. And so it's, a really good model for establishing a certificate. Why can't we do that for clients? He had also been following the world of mobile banking and mobile payments. They're called something slightly different, but something very much like an HSM exists in your pocket and exists on your desktop. In fact, microprocessor vendors don't like to make a lot of varied products. They like to make similar products because from them, there's no increase in cost. So they rolled almost all of their processors now with these secure crypto coprocessor. So you can not just create material where something doesn't move, but in the construction of that material, you can provide a proof that it doesn't move. And if it never moves, it can never be copied. It can never be stolen. And so like a class of problems gets eliminated. And of course, I'm speaking of things like TPMs, trusted protection modules. That's one class, this type of coprocessor. There's other classes. ARM calls theirs, I think, Trust Zone. There's the old school SGS instruction set.
It's some type of secure enclave, essentially.
Exactly.
And then you hold the secret inside that secure enclave, and then you have guarantee that nothing moves out. It can do operations. It can do some type of proof operations. but that's as far as it goes.
And the observation of one of our early engineers was, hey, this exists and no one takes advantage of it for anything that's not a mobile payment. What's the game that just got released? Battlefield 6. Is it Battlefield 6?
I didn't realize Battlefield 6 was using such a important piece of technology.
So it's part of their anti-cheats campaign. So what they're doing is they're making the kernel prove at load time that there's no unauthorized drivers that some of the guys who come up with mods make that can do like cheat injection during like runtime play. It's actually quite clever when you think about it, and it's caused quite the controversy in the gaming community. That's the only reason I know about it. I wish I had time to play games.
This is actually super cool because this is a perfect example of security solving a very specific and painful issue for a business.
Absolutely.
Because if someone is using cheat codes, they probably are bypassing all of the controls that are meant to make people purchase things. And if people don't, then you as a business lose money. Your revenue goes down, your stock doesn't look as interesting as it should be. I think this is a very important subject in general where we as security professionals have to align with business needs and solve those pain points.
Absolutely. I mean, at the end of the day, security is there to serve the business. You can get lucky every now and then, and security is the business, like us, which is kind of fun, right? It gets to be front and center, but you still can't forget it because our customers and really all businesses, they exist for some reason that's generally larger, right? Battlefield 6 is, we're doing this massively multiplayer online gaming and entertainment. And the purpose of security there is to just ensure that everyone has a great experience. It's not unto itself. And I think that's no different in most companies.
100%. The question of identity is becoming ever more interesting and challenging with developments in AI. I've been recording a lot of podcasts. You've been on a lot of shows. You're a very public figure yourself. It takes about 5 seconds, 10 seconds for really accurate representation of your voice and your image generated by AI. And at that point, it's really hard to distinguish whether or not you're speaking to the actual person on the other end of that TLS wire that we just spoke about.
Exactly.
How do you answer the question of how do I ensure that the person on the other end is the actual person?
I love this question. So there's a couple of really cool things about this question. One is, so let's back up again. So I've always believed on the engineering side, the person who describes the problem the best is generally the person, that well-defined problem kind of begets its solution. And so in there is like, well, what's the right question that we should be solving? I think a ton of the industry has kind of jumped on to, is this a deepfake? They think that's the problem. That always kind of didn't sit well with me. And I was trying to figure out why. And it finally realized that there's two kind of reasons and they're very different from each other. So from an engineering perspective, it felt like another heuristic. I probably can detect the artifacts of how you generate deepfakes, but how long will it last? Is it stable? Could you use me to train another generator? Like there are all of these questions that make it feel like if I've decided my new career is knife fights and phone booths, probably not going to live very long. And so, whether it's a business or even engineering, like you don't want fair fights. You want unfair fights. You only want to show up where it's almost impossible for you not to win or solve the problem or whatnot. And the idea of is this a deepfake certainly doesn't fit that. And then there was this other problem, which is, well, wait a minute. Everyone's telling me AI is around the corner and AI is going to be in my toothpaste. It's going to be in my sandwiches. Everybody's going to be like pasting AI on everything. If that's true, let's believe them for a minute. Then why wouldn't I be wearing a realistic mustache before I actually grew mine out to see what it was like? Why wouldn't I be real-time translating into Spanish because I don't speak Spanish? Why wouldn't I have reconstruction done because I had a massive injury this weekend and I'm not comfortable sharing it? So if AI is really around the corner, we know there's valid uses for deepfakes, right? We've seen them all over the place. Why wouldn't that show up everywhere? And if all these tools have decided they're going to work on deepfake detection, then how does it work against valid use? And so we took a step back and we said, that's not the right question. The right question is, who's producing this content right now? From what computer? With what level of authenticity and trust? Or getting back to like the way you phrased it, who's on the other end of this TLS connection? And that's kind of the beauty of these secure enclaves or crypto coprocessors. They have this ability to do something called an attestation. So very much in the moment, you can kind of force a mathematical proof. That mathematical proof will come back and can kind of tell you like, hey, under the assumption that the foundry that made this coprocessor hasn't been violated, I can prove to you I'm this device made in this location with this configuration, and this is the programmed user that's running, and they've used a biometric and possession, and CrowdStrike's running, and the system has been hardened, and so all of these security properties can actually be attested to in real time.
Yep.
And How that gets consumed is kind of an interesting question, but that shifts us more into like security UX, I think, than like security kind of core architecture, which is challenging in itself. But like, you can turn it into small little emblems. You can keep an audit log. You can display the details. But we think that's more of the natural approach to that problem. So we've built a series of plugins into like Zoom and Teams and Outlook and even GitHub and GitLab to be able to answer questions like, who is the person and on what device with what posture am I talking to on Zoom? Who is the person and on what device with what posture sent me this email? Who is the person and with what posture did they actually commit this code to the repo? I don't mean log in to the repo's website, and I don't mean synchronize the repo's database. I mean commit the code. As developers, we all kind of go through these things really quickly, get commit, get pull, get push, etc. But the authentication and authorization model are very, very different for each one of these operations. And just because you log into the website using something secure doesn't mean you really know where that code came from.
In essence, it's a signature to allow your device to sign how authentic the communication is, and the other party on the receiving end can validate the signature is true.
It's a signature over a series of properties that you can kind of decide what level of trust you want to assign.
And I bet it's super cool for any organization that already has some type of MDM, because you can essentially hook your solution alongside with MDM, and that will ensure that only corporate trusted devices are used for the communications between the parties within the same org or the outbound communications.
So that's absolutely true. One of the things we found that probably won't surprise you is organizations almost all start with, hey, we have a super hardened environment. We hardened to this spec. Everything's MDMified. Everything's got EDR. We're perfect. We have no exceptions. And then there's some dude in the room that won't make eye contact anymore. And and this won't usually happen in the first meeting. It's like the second or the third meeting. It's like, well, yeah, they do this. They don't have MDM on these devices. And we have PR partners, and we have legal partners, and we have outsourced developers, and we have an outsourced call center. And so the reality of like an actual enterprise is always heterogeneous. So we actually built our system from the beginning to kind of work in both environments. The great thing about MDM, in our opinion, is distribution. We built an integration with the MDM where we can not just have ourselves packaged and shipped out, but also auto-enroll the users to where they don't even have to be part of the rollout, which is pretty slick. The other thing that we've done with MDM is we can enrich decision-making based on what the MDM sees. But more interesting than that is in all of these exceptional scenarios, we figured out how to make our stuff work without the MDM. Because identity it's the thing that everything crosses. It doesn't matter, employee, contractor, business partner, managed device or unmanaged device. You're always going to cross the identity bridge. So the identity bridge is really the best point of enforcement to understand who on what device is asking for what and for how long. And so it was really important for us to, number one, make sure our authenticator didn't require privilege, because nobody wants to install a privileged thing that's work related on personal devices. So like we wanted to make sure we couldn't do things like remote wipe and blah, blah, blah. But you can do a lot without privilege in terms of security understanding. A couple of you may challenge that statement right now. And my counter challenge is think about how malware works. It initially doesn't have privilege. Anyway, there's a lot you can do without privilege. And so that was really, really important to us, is to make sure that we figured that out. But it also translates into the AI question as well, right? Tying it back to the AI topic from a minute ago. We now have AI in our bread. We have AI in our toothpaste. Everybody's AIing all the things. And in some of those things, maybe there will be businesses. But in all of those things, we see developers pasting secrets, pasting credentials. It's funny, right? It's a new game, but all the same injuries.
The classical security principles still apply.
Exactly. And so these injuries are like credential sprawl, non-compliant device use or non-compliant service usage, data sprawl, mixing data classes. I may have a CMMC part of the business. I may have a FedRAMP part of the business, and I may have services that are clearly not FedRAMP supported. And so take a step back, first principles, even if I'm building an AI system, I've got a user on a device, I've got an agent, maybe on the user's device, maybe actually in a cloud workload. That agent's going to have access to services, right? Like vector databases, MCP services, and whatnot. So what are the questions I want to know? I want to know what user on what device with what posture is using what agent running what model on what device with what posture, and has been given permissions to what services for how long. These are the classic identity questions. I want to be able to answer that every time. I want it to be tamper-proof. I want these attestation properties that I just talked about. And if I have that, I can audit and I can enforce, and I can let my team figure out how to put AI in toothpaste without worry about losing my CMMC compliance. Anyway, that is kind of how it kind of comes back together.
Yeah, you mentioned something very interesting. You mentioned UX. Security solutions in their nature are often very complex and complicated to deploy, to maintain, and to make sure that you get all of the benefit. What is your take on the importance of having very seamless solution in the security space?
I would say the first thing is you have to understand enterprise architecture, and you have to understand the life cycle of the IT admin who's going to basically live, breathe, and sweat your product. So there's some sort of level of complexity that you can't hide from them because they have to administer it. And then below that, obviously you can hide it. Then there's another level, which is the end user. If you only have a soundbite, the end user is your parents. So if your parents can't do it, you're going to fail. But what they have to do and what the IT admin have to do are different. So I would say lessons learned. What are the things that we screwed up early on that kind of were big lessons for us was making a super clear separation between the IT admin and the end user, and treating the end user like our parents and treating the IT admin like an engineer. Right. We merged those concepts a little bit too much up front. And so we oversimplified things on the IT admin but didn't simplify things enough for the end user. Another lessons learned, you got to think about the end users as your parents. What do I actually mean by that? I mean, their job is not technical by nature. They use technical tools to do their job, but their job is finance, their job is accounting, their job is doctoring, right? Their job is that kind of stuff. But more importantly than that, it also means that every time you ask them to get involved in an operation that doesn't help them do their job, pick up a knife and stab yourself once. You're probably not going to die, but you're not going to feel good doing it. And now go sell to a company with 80,000 employees. That's a lot of self-inflicted wounds. Big lessons learned from us were, hey, the standard operating procedure in the identity world is to involve the entire workforce in rollouts. That's horrible. It's also the reason why identity products don't turn over regularly. So we had to come up with a way around that. How do we not involve the end users?
You depend on a human factor. Someone might not be available or someone is on vacation, but when they are back from vacation, maybe installing a new package is not the most top priority on their to-do list at that point in time because they have to catch up with a bunch of emails or whatever the function is.
So a simpler way of thinking about it is just asking a user to change their password is an example where we don't even interpret that as something strange because that's just how computers work. But when you think about it, asking a user to change their password is asking a user to be part of a deployment update for a technical control. You're basically asking everyone in your workforce, all of your parents, to go help you, person in charge of IT or security, go change or update a security control in the business. And the answer is obvious why you do it, because it says to do it on the sheet of paper. But I put the failure more on the system designers like us. Why did we come up with a system where the end user has to be involved, critically so, in what is fundamentally a technical operation? And the answer is, well, wait a minute, a password lives in someone's brain. If they're not involved, what are you even talking about? I'm being a little coy, but with device-bound credentials, with device possession and whatnot, you actually can get away from that. Yeah, that was a key learning. What are the absolute necessary things I need the end users to do and nothing else? Being laser focused on that was pretty key.
So essentially, it's always important in any product to understand who is your ICP, what's the specific pain point that ICP has, and work together with them to solve that pain point. Have you guys done some type of forward deployed programs where you embed your engineers, your close partners together in a very closely embedded circle where those discussions can flow a lot easier and just more natural?
Our most successful deployments, we do that exactly. On the ICP thing, though, I would actually give it a little bit more nuance. So a lot of startup folks trained in kind of the general consumer SaaS business, I think, don't really understand enterprise architecture. And they come at this problem and they think of ICP as a bit of a monoculture, and they don't really think about the ICP in terms of the selling process. The champion, the budget holder, the administrator, and the user, these are all very different people. And they can all shut you down for different reasons. And the way that you make your product sell to these different ICPs or these different personas within your ICP of a customer can actually be at odds with each other. That's also something that I think, at least if you're going into enterprise SaaS and enterprise infrastructure, your UX, your product management, and your product marketing have to be in lockstep on those problems and really embracing the nuance. And when it comes to deployment, it almost doesn't even matter if you're just the new magical hot stuff. Enterprise administrators have grown up and expect that if you are critical infrastructure to their business, you're going to be available and be in the trenches with them. And so, yeah, we found our best deployments go that way. We try and make all of our deployments go that way, but you have to work within the culture of your customers, and not all customer cultures are embracing. Some of them are very much, you deliver the equipment on this day at this parking lot, and I'll take it from there.
What's been the most proud day in your career?
Most proud day in my career? I wish I thought about this more. The days that I felt the best, I like building things from scratch. I like building teams from scratch. A lot of the core folks that I've worked with here, I've worked with off and on, maybe if not my whole career, certainly at least for the last half of it. We did a thing back when I was in grad school called Flowgrammable that I was very proud of. The gist of it was software-defined networking was a big deal at the time. I worked in the service provider industry for the first part of my career on both sides of the road, building equipment and then operating it. We took a team of PhD, master, and even undergraduate students and basically built kernel drivers and user space applications that basically competed in reference design competitions against industry supplied open source software, and like beat all of them but one. It was a lot of fun. It was a big, hairy problem. It required all of your knowledge of how the computer works. How does a CPU actually work? How does a cache actually work? What are the things the compiler is not going to figure out for you? How do you make all of this craziness between 6 different versions of a protocol not be the developer's problem? Only so many developers are going to read a 1,000-page spec. That was fun because it was technically challenging. And I think every person who went through that with me either now works with me at Beyond Identity or at a previous company, Security Scorecard or IronNet, or I helped get them into their positions at some other companies out in the West Coast, some big tech companies. So like, that was a lot of fun because, startups aren't families, but they kind of are. And I know there's a lot of kind of counterculture on, work's not family and work-life balance and whatnot. I don't know. I fallen into the bucket where like, I love this. This is who I am. I'm totally okay with it. And there's a group of people where I think also agree with that statement. You spend so much time with people working, there is a relationship there. You have to like them. There has to be something that you enjoy about spending time together. And so like, these shared values of creating something from nothing, building something that solves a hard problem, solving a problem with purpose, protecting the livelihoods of people's organizations, of people's companies. These are really unifying and bonding things. And they certainly make me proud of that team.
At the end of the day, company is just a collection of people.
Yeah, 100%.
And if that's all it makes, company is just people. And
yeah,
the cool part about startups is you get to iterate over solutions for a specific problem super fast. And you get to solve pain points that not only protect the livelihood of people, it protects the livelihood of organizations and companies that serve millions of people, millions of the consumers.
Oh, yeah. But a little further in that story is we've had a couple of run-ins with state actors, and our product performed and our team performed exceptionally. We kept the goods away from the bad guy, so to speak. We learned a lot in the process, and we built relationships we did not have before that incident or series of incidents. I think it also helped us understand the importance of what we do as a group, as a team, as a product, and as a company. That was a pretty proud day. It's one thing to do something and know intellectually like why you do it and what you're doing it, but it's a whole nother thing to actually see it do its job and come in contact by a very sophisticated actor and essentially, get credited by not one, but 2 incident response teams and red teams after the fact, basically saying, yeah, this is one of the reasons couldn't get best X.
Yeah, in the beginning of the show, we talked about trying to identify deepfakes, which is in itself is sort of chasing the problem. It's a reactive function versus the systems that we all aspire to build are proactive. Instead of doing the root cause analysis of the event, we much rather prevent the event from happening in the first place.
100%.
And it sounds like you just had exactly that experience with one of the customers.
So if you think about the 2010s was all about kind of making a strategic choice, at least in enterprise security. And it was, hey, we're all compromised. We now live in a post-compromised world. How do we find the bad guy and evict them? And so like EDR was built around that rallying cry. Defense in depth was popularized as a phrase, even though the concept existed already. And I think now in this decade is a unique time where you could maybe shift left a little on the security spectrum. I always like going back to NIST, right? So the NIST framework is identify, protect, detect, respond, repair. Maybe not repair, but like something else. Doesn't matter. That usually means call the insurer. And respond is basically, what we do with EDRs and MDRs and XDRs and whatnot. I think this decade is interesting because we can shift a lot of our attention now from that segment a little bit left to kind of identify and protect. which is really more about prevention. If I can guarantee credentials don't move, then credential theft goes away, stuffing, spraying, all of that goes away. If my authenticator is running on the device that the work is happening from, whether it's human or non-human, then I can actually detect man in the middle, and I can prevent session hijacking. I can prevent signing full attacks. If I built a small lightweight sensor into the authenticator and join these questions of who are you and are you safe enough for what you're asking for, I could eliminate this whole class of kind of like pre-staging attacks, the zero blizzard tactics that we talked about, where they're dropping the CA or the plugins. I just rattled off a few things, but if you pull up your MITRE chart, there's a ton of squares now that have X's through them in terms of like, you've basically eliminated something from the architecture to be exploited in the first place. Simpler things are easier to maintain. Fewer moving parts are easier to maintain. If I'm not spraying credentials all over the place, I think I have fewer moving parts. It's a cool concept.
Something about the least privilege, and the less variables you have in that authentication story, the easier it is to control it. There's a very interesting concept of investment in AI. A lot of corporations have invested billions of dollars in AI adoption and have built a lot of workflows, have built a lot of solutions that meant to add value and optimize existing processes and in general make it better for everyone, internally and externally. But the numbers are quite interesting. From 100%, only single digits are deployed in production. One of the core reasons for that is not trusting the system enough and not having ability to audit or to understand that the system did exactly what it was meant to do.
Yeah. So I don't know if I can speak to all of the number of why is it so low, but we have this conversation with our customers as well as kind of new prospects and partners. And they keep coming back to these questions of like, I have defense business, I need to maintain my CMMC accreditation, or I have federal civilian business, I need to maintain my FedRAMP, or I'm a retailer, I've got PCI DSS. How do I make sure that if I'm going to turn on this agentic system and give it access to some of my controlled data, that the controls will flow with the data? So that is a very real concern and fear, and certainly a back pressure on those organizations on like how fast they go. Meanwhile, if they have developers, you know exactly what the developers are doing, right? Pull it out, push it in, give me some of that AI toothpaste. We're trying to help our customers answer those questions or kind of give them the easy button, because the premise that we keep coming back to is it doesn't matter if the identity is driven by a human or driven by a non-human. So when we think about just the fundamentals of computer science, every process, whether it's a daemon, a scheduled thing, or run by a human, has a user ID. That user ID may be tied to a human or not, but it has a user. There's a concept of an identity. All processes have a concept of identity. In a distributed world where I'm connecting all of these things together, a similar concept arises, either implicitly, which is just kind of like the cross product of all of those identities, or explicitly because someone designed it into their data model. So if identity is involved in everything, that means identity sees everything. We think for the large part, they're pretty common. There's a core orchestration layer. That core orchestration layer will pull in various models, either off the shelf, open source models or public models. There's MCP servers and AI services that they'll integrate with. There's data store services, either kind of old school stuff or new school like vector DB sources. And they run on machines that have a posture. So why not ask the basic questions? What end user on what device with what posture and what geography interacted with what agent? So agent identity we think is a thing. I'll come back to that in a minute. But what agent running on what machine with what posture was authorized to use what model with what permissions, what services, what MCP services, AI service, API services, data services, et cetera, with what permissions and for how long? I would argue, number one, those are kind of fundamental security questions that any audit or compliance process, you have to answer that. And the only thing that's new in AI is it's no longer client server. There's kind of like client AI party server, and there can be multiple servers. And there could even be multiple agents. Agent identity, what do we mean? Well, an agent, fundamentally, it's a program. It's truly like an agent, like sense the surrounding, build a model, decide a course of action, take the action, measure the result, wash and repeat. Maybe it's just a workflow, like go gather this information, refine it, find these sub-questions, package a report, and ship it off. Doesn't really matter. These are programs. We already know how to determine the identity of programs. In fact, this is the fundamentals of secure bill of materials or understanding SBOM. And so to us, agent identity is really just tying in the SBOM to the device identity that's executing it, to the provider identities that we're attaching to it. And so you can almost think of it as like, in AI, everybody likes to talk about their vectors. Well, the top of the vector is user ID, user's device ID, user's device posture, user's geography. The middle part of the vector is like, all right, what's the agent ID? What's the agent's device ID? What's the agent's device posture? What's the agent's device geo? And sometimes those can be combined. And then the final part of the vector is who are the provider identities and what permissions are you actually allowing? How do I make that tamper proof? And if I can audit it, then start to see I could probably introduce a policy layer there and start deciding who can do what. Clearly, if I'm doing all of that, I have this great intel source. From an intelligence perspective, what are all the activities now happening in my AI infrastructure? We've traditionally had EDR and ITDR. There's probably an AI DR. Maybe it's going to be a new acronym because sometimes we like to retire the old ones.
Introduce new ones, but nothing really changes under the hood. Core principles of security don't really change. The goal is to protect what's the most important there is at the specific time, and it can be different answer to different organization while not introducing too much friction, because security is always a scale. You can make things as secure as possible, but no one will want to use it because it's impossible.
Yeah. What's the cost of being wrong versus the benefit of being right? And if you have a scaled business, you actually measure that precisely. The banks make their investment based on literally like balance sheets. They price in fraud, and only when fraud passes a certain level do they increase their investments in fraud detection and prevention.
If there is something that you would like to share with our listeners, words of wisdom, I think this would be a great opportunity to do so right now.
Fundamentals matter. You still kind of need to know how a computer works. I think there's this implicit assumption the industry has, you can only run detection and response. I think it's time to actually challenge that. And getting back to that analogy where you could actually simplify your architecture by moving to immovable credentials, whether with us or someone else. But if you move to an architecture that makes that simplification, you're going to see a reduction in help desk tickets. You're going to see a reduction in security incidents. This will translate as a benefit to you in a couple different ways, depending on how you run your business. While these are security actions, they don't actually come at a productivity loss. And in fact, if you do it right, we've seen productivity gains. One of our customers is using our technology for their customer side of the business, and they've seen the success login rate of their customers go from 80% to 95%.
That's huge.
They were doing this for the reasons of fraud and ATO, but now they're running reports to try and figure out what does that turn into in terms of revenue increases. So like, this is one of those rare times where doing the right thing from a security perspective is actually a better experience, and depending on your business, can actually contribute to the top line.
There's so many opportunities in the security space to align solutions to a problem with the revenue growth or with the better user experience, which then ultimately will lead to the revenue growth.
Absolutely.
Jasson, it's such a great honor to have you on the show. Thank you for joining the security podcast of Silicon Valley. And today's show was brought to you by YSecurity and Beyond Identity.
Thank you for having me, and it was a lot of fun.
Awesome. Thank you, Jasson.
One last thing before you go. Think about who you were 20 minutes ago. Maybe security's been that thing that's on your roadmap, that thing that you'll get to right after the next sprint, the thing that you'll get to after the raise or after something. But here's the truth. SOC 2 and ISO, these things are not just checkbox. They're keys. It unlocks enterprise deals. It opens up regulated industries. It's the difference between selling to a 10-person startup and closing Fortune 500s. That's where YSecurity comes in. We don't just advise, we build. SOC 2, ISO, done right the first time. 40+ engineers from Apple, Uber, Microsoft, Robinhood, Brex. This is not guesswork for us. This is all we do. And maybe you're not the one who needs this, but you know a founder who does. The one trying to break into bigger markets, the one doing the 0 to 1 thing. Send them our way. We have an awesome referral program. We pay for introductions that turn into partnerships. So head to ysecurity.io/startups. The first 8 hours are free. 40 engineers, 1 full working day entirely on us. YSecurity has your back. See you in the next episode.